Hi everyone, welcome to the EEB seminar. My name is Regina and I'm on the seminar committee this year, and we've been working on inviting people nominated by graduate students. So this week we're very excited to welcome Wendy Katagi, and she is the senior manager at the Watershed and Ecosystem Restoration Services at Stillwater Sciences. And she is helping to lead a restoration effort of the Los Angeles River. And so this is a really great opportunity for us to learn about how research can translate into action and restoration in the ecosystems that we live in. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy. And let's welcome Wendy.
Thank you, Regina. Thanks, everybody. I'll just start off by sharing a little bit about our work, who I am, and then just segue right into the LA River context for us today. And you can feel free to ask questions. I wanted this to be a little bit more of a conversation, but I understand we have time at the end. So there will be time at the end to just focus on your questions as well online. Hello, as well as folks here. Thank you so much for being here and kind of returning to UCLA in person. So my background is in social ecology, environmental health and planning. And so it's kind of full circle for me. I did go to UC Irvine and studied there, and then also studied business administration at the Claremont Graduate School. And my background really has been in implementation as well as planning related studies to bring restoration to our watersheds, and managing a lot of scientists, ecologists, and engineers who have the same goal and studied similar things. And our focus really, Stillwater Sciences Los Angeles office is downtown in the Bradbury building. And our focus really is on endangered species, threatened and endangered species recovery work. And we have a lot of biologists and folks that are doing research. We are partnering with UCLA, the Grand Challenge, and have been a partner since I think Mark Gold was overseeing the program. Isaac Brown focused on biodiversity. He's a graduate of the doctorate program. And some of the work I'll be sharing today is from Isaac's work. But anyway, we're pretty diverse in our backgrounds at Stillwater Sciences, and you'll kind of see that. I have some pictures of our staff, so you'll get a feel for that. But I know a lot of you are very much in the research mode, and you're looking at data, and you're wondering how that translates into practitioners who are doing restoration like us on the LA River or elsewhere. And we do partner a lot with the universities and try to stay close to the universities in terms of monitoring programs, as well as processing the data and doing research papers and other things. So very glad to be here. Thank you. And so today, the focus of the talk is going to be on how this monumental change could happen in a channelized system like the LA River. And so you'll be seeing a lot of those stories, as well as work completed and how we've done it. And what I wanted to start with is also marrying the natural and the human benefits relative to what is known as the virtuous socio-ecological cycle. And I'll talk more about that. So it's a 3-point agenda today. I'll share a little bit about the pilot projects that are perpetuating this cycle. We'll talk about the alignment that has occurred over decades between agencies and communities. So universities as well, and how those partnerships have pushed us forward to where we are today and where we will be in the future. Third, we're going to hit into what a river reborn could look like given the work that has been planned, adopted, and now going into implementation, and the monitoring that will be required to keep us learning about what's working and how to adjust to climate resiliency and all those other factors that are affecting us. And with that, it's really starting a movement. So I'll be going into that and discussion. So just to start off, I was really inspired. I went to the Aquarium of the Pacific, I guess it was October, to hear Ian Shive with Discovery Channel and National Geographic, and he's a conservationist, and he was talking about the release of his new book, Refuge. And basically, we are stewards of the earth. And one of the quotes that Ian shared from Henry Reston really kind of struck a chord with me, and so I wanted to share that today. We patronize them for their incompleteness, for their tragic fate, for having taken form so far below ourselves. And therein do we err. For the animal shall not be measured by man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with the extension of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren, they are not underlings, they are other nations, caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth. That's from his book, The Outermost House. Has anybody read that book? Okay, highly recommend. He wrote that when he was spending time in Cape Cod. So for context, I was telling you about my story and how I have always been working in watersheds and in my background doing a lot of the environmental planning associated with projects that would eventually get implemented. And as part of our approach, we definitely look at a watershed scale. So from the top of the watershed, the headwaters, so for the LA River, we have two upper tributaries. We have the Arroyo Seco. Anybody go up there? Pasadena by the Rose Bowl, San Gabriel Mountains, highly erosive system. The San Gabriels are one of the most erosive in the world. So a lot of sediment when those rains hit. Tujunga, anybody from that side? La Cañada Flint Ridge. Tujunga is the other upper tributary, another massive open space area with forests and managed by the Forest Service. So we look at the watershed, the upper tribs, as huge resources of biodiversity and understanding what this watershed once looked like. Because compared to the lower watershed or the middle, we all know where we are right now, there is extensive urbanization down here compared to the upper tributaries. So a lot of our native species, habitats, systems are more intact in the upper watershed. So the pictures on the right are just some of our projects. And we work throughout the watershed very opportunistically because there are a lot of adopted plans already. So now it's all about who's ready to go, who can get the funding, who can make it happen, which lead agency is ready. So these are some of the projects, and what we're highlighting with the LA River, this blue that you see here, is the connectivity that's needed in order to bring biodiversity back so we face the river and not turn our backs to the river. So parks, bikeways, access for all the communities that live and depend upon the river system. So what is this virtuous cycle that we're talking about? So this is a quote from Morrison, the Nature Conservancy, who started this movement about the socio-ecological cycle. So the aim is to create a virtuous cycle that will be the engine for continued accrual of benefits to both people and nature by mainstreaming conservation, so it becomes a part of and product of business as usual. Specifically, the virtuous cycle framework envisions a system in which an intervention aimed to improve the diversity and resilience of a given place catalyzes a positive feedback loop by providing benefits from nature or ecosystem services to people, to you and I, who are then mobilized to impact policies and our practices to improve the place, which then produces increased benefits to both nature and people, to us. This is one of Morrison's simple graphics. So the which, the where, the who. So I'll be showing you what those things are in the LA River example. So where, it's our LA River, the community. Who, it's all of us who depend upon it. Which could be like steelhead or some specific target that we're trying to influence. And all of these things, how, why, what, outcome, these pilot projects are kind of fueling the influence that we talked about, the socio-ecological cycle, and then impacts back to us. Okay, so just big picture. We all know that not every community has a beautiful park that they can bike to. To see native habitat is even rarer, right? And thinking about LA River, its history being channelized after catastrophic floods took lives. And similarly, the Army Corps doing this throughout the nation. The goal was, let's move that water to the ocean as fast and safely as possible, because we don't want more lives to be taken. And so at the time, channelization was like a victory, okay? And the president and the Army Corps said, Yahoo, we've solved the flooding issue. However, things have changed, and now we see the impacts of really single purpose projects. So flood and safety are extremely important today as they were back then. But because of the channelization, we have things like poor water quality, odors, neighborhoods that can't even face the river. There's walls, there's industry that's backed up to the river, pollutants, every stormwater discharge to the river. So this figure is showing the LA River and the Rio Hondo Creek, which is part of the San Gabriel system, and Compton Creek. So it's just highlighting some of the very urban parts, okay, of LA River. And the red is actually showing the highest flagged areas where there is like park poor. It's like the highest in the nation. So you can imagine asthma, you know, different effects that children grow up with, adults, seniors, because we have no greening for the most part along the LA River. So the socio-ecological cycle that we're talking about is really important for our longevity, future generations. We need to increase access to nature. We need to bring our science forward to understand how to do that effectively. So this slide is showing some of our partners and Stillwater Science biologists and engineers who are working on the LA River restoration and the Arroyo Seco, that upper trib that goes up to Pasadena. And we're so excited because there's already a lot of funding to actually push us into implementation. The figure on the left, this one here, Isaac developed, and it's really a conceptual ecological model. We'll get into that more. But steelhead trout, an endangered species, they're down to about 500 left in Southern California. If that species can persist in our systems, in our watersheds like the LA River, then we really have balanced a lot of different things that affect the habitat that's needed for migration of this amazing fish. Steelhead are 3 feet long. So they migrate at the tail end of our storms, similar to last month when there was that rain event. And they do come. And so we're finding stranded fish and things like that. Okay, I love this painting. I have it at home and in the office, the natural coast. So this is how it used to look. This is a watercolor painting, but this is Palos Verdes Peninsula, Bixby Slough, the LA River. This is San Gabriel River down by Seal Beach. So anyway, there's just amazing opportunity to move us forward if we can get these pilot projects in the ground, integrating what we have learned about our historic landscapes, our cultural resource, native tribal landscapes, and come together as a community. This is a picture of an actual design workshop for the LA River. So what you'd imagine, there's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of engineering, a lot of constraints with the LA River. And so we often start off with these initial design workshops, and we share what are the opportunities, what are the constraints. Our landscape architects and illustrators will start to incorporate feedback that we've learned from Cal Fish and Wildlife, from National Marine Fisheries Service, a lot of our scientists, about what would a more natural braided stream that used to exist in the LA River floodplain look like within the LA River channel, okay? So these are sketches showing what you would expect a trout stream to look like, basically, and sediment moving through with vegetation, native. And this is a cross section, just sketching out what that might look like for fish and wildlife. So that's just keep that in the back of your mind. Now I'm going to give you a little planning exercise so that you can understand how is it that we can jump from, oh, I got funding, to let's restore the LA River. Okay, there are steps and there's been a lot of work. So the city of LA recently adopted a biodiversity index and a strategic plan, and they're working with the county. So these are available online if you want to go look. And it has all the different species, all the native species, and recommendations for next steps. So all of those tasks, that's the City of LA Sanitation Department. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but just know that that's a resource that the whole city is using in trying to implement river restoration and parks along the river, as well as upland. So not LA River specific, but upland areas, parks, things like that. The second tool we have are GIS-based mapping and modeling. So this is the LA County Ecotopes Expansion Neighborhood Scale Mapping Restoration Suitability Model. UCLA is mentioned here, USC. So historical ecology, Travis Lancourt and others, Grand Challenge, working on what would be a suitability model for the county. The goal here is to make this accessible, free to the public, so that anyone in any neighborhood, say you had a neighborhood council and you wanted to work on biodiversity in your neighborhood, you could go there and you could say, oh, I'm in the Elysian Valley. Okay, so riparian, and here's the species that would be native here. Okay, so if you can imagine in your picture mind, this is an opportunity for any person to get educated and to think about their own backyard. What could I be doing for pollinators, for birds, mammals, just keep going. So this gives you that kind of high level planning, understanding and tools of what we're using to inform pilot projects. Third, connectivity, planning and modeling. So this is super exciting stuff. How many of you know about P22, the mountain lion, Griffith Park? Okay, yeah, he's so famous, Hollywood sign. So we want not just P22, but all the other species, right? We want wildlife corridors for deer, bobcat, smaller mammals and lizards and everybody. And so what's happening is CDFW has already identified a lot of the opportunities. We are partnering with these resource agencies to implement wildlife projects, connectivity projects. This is a quick map that just kind of shows you hot red opportunities. Those are the areas that we want to connect, and how within city planning, general plans, things like that, codes, the city planners are armed with this kind of information so that when projects are going forward and proposals are going forward, they have a toolbox to use to connect, to connect these different opportunities. Okay, I gotta keep moving here. So we are basically aligned with the resource agencies, the city biodiversity planning, and federal, state, all of these guys. So just think of this as like the backbone. We're all aligned. And so that's what's led to this fast moving LA River work that's hitting now. Some of you may have been following LA River for the last 2 decades with Lewis McAdams, FOLAR, Friends of the LA River. Lots of amazing movement and education. Now it's about pulling the concrete out and let's start doing the work, okay? So, one other big partner, State Wildlife Conservation Board, huge funding, okay? That's making a lot of this possible. It's making our project possible. Okay, one more thing. So LA River, it's always flowing, but there's this low flow channel, and at points it kind of looks from a distance like a trickle, but actually it's 100 CFS, 100 cubic feet per second. It's a lot of water. Okay, that's more than a trickling stream. Where's that water coming from? Some of you know, Tillman plant, okay, it's a lot of reclaimed water. Okay, it's going to the ocean. So there's this study that's going on, or studies. How much flow should we leave in the river? How much flow should we take for water supply, recycling, and people, right? Water supply. So there's this water rights decision-making going on this year that will impact how much water will be left in the river for other beneficial uses. recreation kayaking. Anybody go kayaking? Glendale Narrows, Sepulveda Basin? Okay, we need to keep those uses. Okay, I could go on on that, but anyway, we're finding this common ground that all these different agencies who are managing water are saying, how do we do this? How do we balance the needs of the environment and people? So I just wanted to throw that there because it's a really big deal right now. And it will influence, of course, how successful our ecosystems will be. This is a little eye candy for you. This is UCLA master plan. So this is the landscape plan that Isaac and others are working on with UCLA right now to create biodiversity on campus. You know about that? Okay. So that's a cool way to get involved. I know we've had hundreds of folks involved with that. I just wanted to show you that in terms of pilots, this is more than a pilot, right? This is a master plan or whatever you want to call it, a big plan for enhancing biodiversity on campus. And so that also fits in with the connectivity thing that I was talking about and the bigger city plans. Okay, here we go. Now we're diving into LA River Reborn, how to start a movement or how to keep building the movement and how to quilt these opportunities together based on the community voices and the watershed science. Okay, this is the confluence area of the LA River with the Arroyo Seco. We're walking down the service road. And I just threw in this fun quote from Walt Disney. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So we're all about that because we've done a lot of studies already. And we need to get into monitoring. You know, we were talking about that there needs to be much more understanding of the biota. Okay, so this is the project study reach. Glendale Narrows transitions from the soft bottom at that bike trail to concrete lined right here above the Arroyo Seco confluence. That's the start of our project area. It goes all the way down to Main Street. It's all channelized, looks a lot like this. This is a 5-mile pilot. Why LA? Because the mayor and all of the political will is there to push this project into implementation. Why not start somewhere else? Yeah, we would love to start somewhere else too, but this is where the opportunity is. They're spending $1.8 billion on ecosystem restoration for the Army Corps partnered LA River study. I mean, now the study's done. Now it's engineering construction, okay? So we put the grant together, we worked really hard, we got it all. Okay, so now we've gone from planning to design. Here's all the tasks that we've completed. Limiting factors, conceptual ecological model, basis of design report, all the environmental, you know, looking at all those things, started permitting, cultural and tribal. Here's a little glimpse of the conceptual ecological model. It's available online if you guys are interested learning about steelhead. And you probably have tons of questions about that. But anyway, this is the study that informed the design. Okay, limiting factors, all the things you'd expect. Altered flow, barriers to upstream migration. I mean, there's dams, right? High water temperatures, spawning and rearing habitat are in the upper tributaries. Okay, newsflash, there are trout above the dam, okay? Native trout that can go, if they were helped down to the ocean, they could transform from rainbow trout to steelhead. Okay, these are the real kind, they're not like farmed trout. Okay, so they're protected. Sorry, one more thing. So integrating with LA River planning is of course huge. This is the Arroyo Seco. It's a rendering. It's probably not going to look this lush, but they have funding now to design this thing. So it's going to be transformed from concrete to something a lot more natural. And we're talking about not just fish, all kinds of connectivity that needs to happen at the confluence. It's a key place. Okay, so what? 1.8 billion? Like, what are you going to do with all that, right? Okay, here's one glimpse. So what's currently a rail yard, piggyback yard, is slated to become a world-class park. Okay, they're going to take down the walls and they're going to convert it into a wetland with steelhead trout habitat. So this is like major moves. Will we see it in our lifetime? Probably. This is the most ambitious of all of the designs. So our fish passage integrates with this. Okay. Here's a modified low flow channel concept that you'll probably start to see up and down the LA River. And we're going to take baby steps in the beginning because this is like mind blowing. Okay. And the county and the Army Corps are like really careful about things. So basically it's going to be notching into the existing low flow channel, creating the gravel bed and the habitat needed, the emergent vegetation and other things that will also cool water, but also make it look a lot better. And then fish thrive in these kinds of environments, as do other wildlife. The key thing here for steelhead, just so you think about it, is their migration window. They can swim in less than a week. They can swim the whole length. Okay, so they're not going to be like sitting there in the middle of summer. They're gone already. They've gone up and down or whatever. So this is going to start to happen. If you want to learn more about the whole thing, there's a whole website on this. The nonprofit Council for Watershed Health has a whole GIS story map, has all of our studies, all the designs. There's outreach, education, there's ways to get involved. The Aquarium of the Pacific just added to their steelhead exhibit, the outdoor one, the whole story about our project, the LA River. Okay, so there's lots of opportunities to get involved. Here's our team: Isaac, Shelley, Sam, Matt, Derek, Lucy, Nate, Bruce, and like, I don't know, 20 other people. So really exciting opportunities, different kinds of people that, you know, if you wanted to learn more about Stillwater Sciences, you can go on our website. But that's the high level view. I've enjoyed being here with you. And so thank you. How are we doing on time? Oh, good. Okay, now we can really relax. Okay, so we can just go around. Questions? Yes.
This is so exciting. I am curious how much meandering of the river is going to be allowed within these plans. It looks like from that part that you talked about, the rail yard, that would allow for water.
Yes.
To kind of like for the seasonality.
Yes. Yes.
To be controlled for, but how much in the decanalization process is going to allow for natural meandering, and how do you accommodate for all the built infrastructure when you think about that?
Great question. So there will be meanders, and in areas like the Arroyo Seco confluence to the LA River, where it's going to be soft bottom, there will be a lot more opportunity for the channel just to do what it wants. And I believe they're going to acquire some of the floodplain area to allow for this more natural kind of opportunity or moment. The areas like this would also have some meandering at Piggyback Yard, and it's all soft bottom. But then it'll transition to areas that are more highly constrained, where we know the flood. There's this thing called freeboard. How much freeboard do you have when you add these elements into the channel? Because the waters rise, 100-year flood. And so we know that based on the flood requirements, working with the Army Corps, that in those places, we have to simulate what would be a little bit of meander through where we cut in the channel. And then there's going to be anchored vegetation planter boxes so that there's not too much what they call substrate and roughness, it's called roughness, to blow the water out and cause flooding issues. So anchored, and then it's almost like, if you think of like Legos, you're kind of cutting into the channel, and in different places, it's almost like, oh, there's a pocket for a backwater pool. Okay, and then vegetation, a little bit of tree. So it's gonna look almost like it's meandering, but it's not fully swinging in and out. And it's fixed, in some cases fixed, yeah. Yeah, other questions? We have questions online? Oh, there you go, question.
The decision of like how much water is in the river, how much water that like we use it depends on like for other uses.
Yes.
How like you could talk a little bit about how we make those decisions and
Yeah,
what's necessary for
that's a good one. So have you heard of the Southern California Water Research Project, SCORP? They do a lot of good science, and yeah. So on their website, they have the studies that have been done to talk about decisions that need to be made about other beneficial uses. And they even have this fun little sliding tool. It's like a game you can play on the website. What happens when you reduce the water from 100 CFS down to 5? You know, like take all the water, almost all the beneficial uses go away, of course. So what's going on is this thing's stuck. We're working with SCORP and the State Water Board and others. There's like 90 agencies involved in water rights. You know, it's crazy, from Glendale, Burbank. I don't know if you saw the LA Times. That was like a really big article 2 weeks ago or something. Louis Hagen covered it, this whole story. So there's no simple way to really analyze the LA River flows. There's just so much alteration that's occurred. And I think your question though was just, what do you look at? Is that your kind of, okay. So what we look at, we talked about this access to nature, recreation. Okay, so recreation use, access to nature. Okay, so think of, okay, well, you're going to do some steelhead stuff, but downstream, we're also working on like a park thing that people could walk down into the channel in the lower LA River, ADA access, all kinds of crazy like things, ideas. But with that means Compton, Paramount, those communities would have access to the river. So recreation for them is going to mean something that's kind of beautiful. You know, people would want to hang out, look at nature, maybe not boat down there, but, you know, have some access. So we need to look at what flow would be needed to keep that park alive. And the vegetation and there's a lot of migratory birds. So basically it's like, okay, for those migratory birds, they need these kind of benthics, and you need this kind of flow year round. So we would look at recreation there at the top of the watershed. It's Sepulveda Basin. it's set for the Olympics. I mean, there's like all kinds of things up there. And so flows related to recreation in areas like that where you're boating. It's almost like you need to have enough flow for a kayak and boating and lots of things. So it's going to be a seasonal thing where certain times of the year there's less water in the river because it's safe to boat in non-winter season, right? The kayaks you do it summer. So it'll be seasonal, but then it's also on the ecological side. It's going to be fish, veg, wildlife, you know, projects like ours that will dominate the scene and drive, okay, well then you need this kind of flow. And, you know, I think the state board is just in a place where they're thinking, we don't have a lot of tools to make this kind of decision. And once you make the decision, it's irreversible. So that's water rights. So we're trying, it's probably going to be longer than a few months. It's probably like a year or more to get through that process. And then we're just going to keep bringing the science and bringing the people's voices forward through, you know, really organized formats like the tribes and their ceremonies, what they need, you know, it's a lot. Okay.
There's a question for you in the chat.
Okay. Chat. How have oh wait, let's go back up. What types of similar projects have been done in other cities that can inform decisions to be made for the LA River? How have considerations relating to both drought and climate change been incorporated into these plans? Great questions. Okay, so the first one, other cities. So on the, okay, there have been a lot. So on the City of LA's LA River website, I believe they still have posted their trips to Europe, Korea, like other countries, and then like Texas, you know, the Rio, projects around the world, really, where not exactly like LA, but have had similar challenges of flooding, people building right up to the river, you know, that kind of thing. And so there have been, the mayor's office in particular has spent a decade or more looking at other examples across the nation as well as around the world. The Arbor study, that $1.8 billion restoration, that's a result of all of that, looking around the globe. So let's see. Informing decisions. So Stillwater has worked on maybe 20 or so in-stream flow studies across California and Pacific Northwest. And so, you know, we're used to a lot of fish and water kind of issues and farmers and fish and, you know, those in-stream flow studies. So our folks are definitely loving this work, but it's different, right? Because the steelhead aren't here right now, but there's like rainbow that are trapped in the headwaters. And then there's steelhead in the ocean trying to migrate, but they can't because the velocities are too great. So our folks are basically using pilots to inform what could happen downstream and upstream to allow full migration. And so I'm talking fish again, but you know, it applies to like any species really, or any use is it's the what. So you could put like kayak in that box and then, okay, what do we need? So that's kind of that question. And that should help to inform the division of water rights when they're trying to make their decision. Okay. Oh yeah, drought and climate change. Yes. So the Mayor Garcetti, gosh, I think it's been 4 or 5 years since he adopted, and you can go on the website there, his whole sustainability plan and climate resiliency and everything from water to technology, solar, you know, like greenhouse gas, all those things. So when you think City of LA, there's so much there in terms of technology and pushing us to be a green city. He also thinks of us as a river city, just so you know, green city, river city. And so this whole stuff, all this that we're talking about, LA River, it's happening for real. You know, it's like, it's already adopted, it's gonna go. So there's political will. Drought, yes. So as we know, we're in a drought. We're in a drought many years. We'll still be in droughts, you know, going forward. 50 years, 100 years, okay. So the true story is though, folks like steelhead and other species existed through many, many hundreds of thousands of droughts, okay, in the history of time before us. So, and they migrate at the tail end of a storm. So their opportunity to spawn and do their whole thing is like this small window of time. And that's what they do in other areas. And I can keep going on steelhead recovery, but they're coming back. And fire is one of the most big like changes that we will see. Higher recurrence of fire and intensity of fire. So fire management, especially in the headwaters, is like a huge initiative. So that's another thing to think about, climate change. And climate change and drought are basically core to every project that we work on. And it's just, that's the given. And so it affects what kinds of plans, everything you can think of, how to plan, okay, 50, 100 years, will this work? You know, and even with that, as you know, with science and data, you learn something new every time you're monitoring. So adaptive management and monitoring is really key for all of our projects, and it's like stuck on every scope of work. Great.
I have a question related to that.
Uh-huh.
If you're thinking about water, I mean, you talked about surface water here, but how much is groundwater?
Very good question. Yeah, we love the groundwater stuff because groundwater dependent ecosystems are really what's driving what's possible in the next, 50, 100 years. And depending on the watershed, you have really great groundwater opportunities, Okay, so LA River has multiple groundwater basins from the ocean, you talk about those water systems, to Elysian Valley, kind of central LA River, and the upper. There's all these spreading basins for groundwater recharge, and folks are maximizing their use for water supply. Okay, now to the extent that some of our groundwater basins are getting so depleted, over pumping and creating more issues for the water, LADWP and other folks who are managing their groundwater basins. So for us on the ecosystem restoration side, what we do is we run the models. So the groundwater models to understand how much water really might be available, and the surface water groundwater interaction that occurs like in the soft bottom areas, Elysian Valley. There's so much of that going on. Okay, so that along with springs, there are actually natural springs in the Arroyo Seco in different places that still have very cool, clean water. So what we are advocating for is let's try to protect that in perpetuity, because if you have natural springs and good groundwater and your surface water can interact, that's the best of all worlds. If you can get that opportunity. Compton Creek is channelized, but has that opportunity. So in the lower, so it's different in different places, but even, was it MacArthur Park? There's some amazing existing parks that have springs that are just covered by concrete. So what we do is we look for those and then we try to unearth it, and then we try to make the system work and integrate wetlands or something like that instead of concrete. So that's a great question, and it's a huge part of the water supply portfolio. Yes.
Focused in on sort of motivating this restoration from the perspective of restoring steelhead trout populations. And I'm wondering, sort of, as you're planning and looking towards the future, how do you go about navigating restoring a population that at first I imagine you wouldn't want anyone fishing, to maybe bringing in those stakeholders down the road that might be excited to have a fish population that they could interact with?
Right.
How do you?
Yes, that's a great question. And so the goal of that whole NIMS Southern Steelhead Recovery Plan is to delist the steelhead. So to have enough resident populations that they could delist it from the Endangered Species Act, as they've done for other, like the California condor. Okay, so that's just the like the regulatory part. The education part is really a delicate thing, depending on who you're talking to. So the native tribes have a lot of respect, of course, for steelhead trout, salmon. I mean, they get it, okay? The fishermen, the fly fishermen who are like fishing for carp, bass, catfish, green sunfish, okay? They have a different mindset, right? And some of them love to eat that fish, okay? So we have folks, Shelley Backlar, formerly with Friends of the LA River, those are her friends. And so, we have to talk to them differently, right? And the kids, they like to fish. Okay, so there's a whole education thing that needs to happen. And it's been done in other watersheds for salmon, okay? So you start with trout in the classroom or some experience where kids, adults can learn about, oh, that's a trout we want to protect versus the bass and the sunfish. Oh yeah, go ahead, fish them out, So it's kind of that type of process. It's going to start to happen in parks that are doing this. So Southgate just is going to be open urban orchard, and they're going to have a conservation 1 acre wetland with like native fish. And so they're going to be educating their kids, their whole city about trout, chub, native. We don't fish these guys, okay, but we fish the other stuff. Is that kind of getting at your question?
A bit, yeah. I'm just wondering, if you accomplish that goal, now the populations are healthy, like how do you manage that transition in mindset about how you're approaching this?
Yes, yes. So I would say it's similar to what's happening in the headwaters. So in the headwaters, we have the native trout, 400, 500 native trout, and a lot more education needs to go into it, but the nonprofits are the ones that are boots on the ground, educating folks every weekend. Hey, so we've got some native trout in here and we're going to protect them, So it's stewardship, and it's nonprofits like the Arroyo Seco Foundation, the Trout Scouts that do that. But I think, if we get even 10 steelhead back to the LA River, the plan is with that 1.8 billion to, in the arbor, it's the, anyway, in the Glendale Narrows where we're doing to create off-channel conservation areas for the trout, for spawning, for rearing, because we need to provide that space for them, like the soonest available space. And then there would be, again, steelhead stewards and people educating about it, and yeah. And I think mainstream media, YouTube or whatever, anything we can do to like boost the image of what this, it's kind of like the polar bear or something. You kind of have to like do some amazing story. And then the good news is we do have, the resource agencies that protect these species anyway. That's their job, if you will. They have jurisdiction. So it's kind of like a funnel of leaders that are all working together and trying to monitor, manage the population, and work on that. And yeah, there's a whole Salmonid Restoration Federation. There's like a whole group statewide that does this. And so we would probably start to host, if we had steelhead down here, we'd start to host that big conference, and all those steelies would come down and help us out. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think at this point we're up at the
Good.
hour. But one more question. One brief question in the chat.
Do you anticipate that you will need to maintain the planter boxes? Will these habitats need to be highly managed? Okay, great question. We are doing everything possible to look at soil media and plants that are going to be resilient, that already exist in the system, that are native. So they should not need maintenance per se. If they have the 2 to 3 CFS, very little water, a little bit of water running through the planter. So the goal would be for this vegetation to be as low maintenance as possible. But I think people will be so interested that it's going to get a lot of attention, go from concrete line to vegetation. It's going to attract people who want to help steward it. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Okay,
Wonderful.
thank you so much.
For